or I call it a webinar on Zoom. Once we can meet face to face again, we will do that. And I'll say something about the plan, the forward program at the end of this session. But it is a delight this evening to have Bill Kwan and Ernie Richards with us, who are both farmers, local farmers. And I'll say more about them and about Phil in a moment. I think you're probably all familiar with how Zoom works. What we're going to do while I'm asking Bill, and when he arrives, Phil, some detailed questions, is I think we'll mute you all. If what they say prompts you with any questions, can you put those questions in the chat, which you'll find if you click at the bottom of the page on More, you'll see chat there. Open that and put your question in that column. And Guy and I will make a note of those questions, which we will address at the end. After I've spoken to Bill and I hope Phil for 35 minutes or so, then we will open the floor to questions. And there is a facility at the bottom there for participants to put a hand up, but it's easier if you just wave. So if you've got a question, wave, and we'll take turns to ask you your question.
Here's
Is
Philip.
all right?
Richard. Philip's arrived.
Yeah, I've been trying to get in. When I first clicked the link, it just sent me to the Zoom page. I had to go back and click it again before it had actually come up with this particular meeting. I don't quite know why. It's not done that before.
Oh, it may be when I click on the link, it comes up to the general Zoom page. If I wait a moment, I then get a box in the middle of it, which then opens up. Sometimes sometimes it's just a bit slow.
For about 3 or 4 minutes, and then I decided to go out of it and start again, and it worked.
Yeah. It's very nice to see you, Phil. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. You're very welcome.
Pleasure.
I had difficulty getting it as well.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry about that.
Okay, we're here.
Let me just start with some opening remarks. As I said, as Guy Wilkinson said in the newsletter invitation to this evening's event, for farmers and consumers, we are at a critical moment. We'll be leaving the European Union, perhaps with no deal. We're starting trade negotiations with the USA, which wants to impose its lower food and farming standards on us. There's no long-term commitment to the same levels of farm support as under the Common Agricultural Policy of the EU, and the government aims, or at least seems to want to aim, to lower the protection against imported food. The National Farmers Union petition was signed by 1 million people and has led to the government agreeing to set up an advisory trade and agriculture commission. While negotiations continue in Parliament on the agriculture bill, with the EU on our future relationship, including trade, and with the US specifically on a trade deal, there will continue to be much uncertainty about the future our farmers have to face on a wide range of issues, including food standards and tariffs, farm income support, and farming and environmental policies. I hope this evening we can try to identify the key issues for our farmers, at least in this part of the country. Let me introduce briefly our speakers this evening. Phil Bennion runs the family farm in Tamworth in Staffordshire, where he was born. He studied agriculture and agronomy at Aberdeen and Newcastle, where he got a PhD in crop science in 1985, so we should really be calling him Dr. Bennion. He then later did a second degree in history and economic history at the University of Birmingham. He advised Charles Kennedy on agricultural issues during his leadership of the Liberal Democrats, and he became an MEP for the West Midlands as a Liberal Democrat from 2012 to 2014, and again 2019 until this year. There he sat on the Committee on Foreign Affairs and the Subcommittee on Human Rights, and was also a substitute on the Committee on the Internal Market and Consumer Protection. Bill is the National Farmers Union County Champion for Herefordshire. He graduated from Harper Adams University in Newport in Shropshire in 1988 in agricultural marketing and business administration. He started his own business in Herefordshire while working for his parents, who I think were growing and marketing potatoes. And Bill has retained an interest in potatoes as a potatoes board member for the Agriculture and Horticulture Development Board. He is a director of Quan Farming Company Limited at Houghton Farm at Pontrylus, which grows combinable crops, pedigree, Hereford and Limousin cattle, sheep and potatoes. And he's a member of the Council of the Royal Three Counties Agricultural Show since 2013. And Ernie Richards, who I'm going to ask to speak first in a moment, is chairman of the Herefordshire Federation of Young Farmers Clubs this year, finishing in September. He's a sheep farmer just across the border, I think at Claro, near Hay-on-Wye in Powys. But this afternoon I watched an interview with him with Ben Eagle on Meet the Farmers, which told me a bit more about it. There's not much about Ernie on the internet, but in that interview he described himself as a Herefordshire farmer born and bred, because he was born and brought up at Lentwydine. He went to agricultural college near Hereford and then took a degree in agriculture with animal science at the University of Aberystwyth. And he's been working possibly since the age of 16, I may have got that wrong, over at, is it Stuart Morris, is that S.R. Morris and Son over at Claro? And as I say, this last year, he has been chairman of the whole Federation of Young Farmers Clubs. I know he'd very much like to say something about Young Farmers Clubs to us, maybe about, it's been a difficult year for him as chairman with activity locked down, but what are the prospects that you see for young farmers as we come out of lockdown and as we approach Brexit?
Well, thank you for asking me to join your meeting tonight. The year hasn't really gone to plan as expected. With coronavirus, it definitely has put the spanner in the works, and definitely has made young farmers really think about what Young Farmers is about, and which is such a social thing it is. And what Young Farmers does, it brings people together. And obviously with coronavirus, that hasn't been the case. And so over the last few months, obviously since lockdown, we've had to try to do a lot of virtual things for our members to keep everybody motivated. And I think trying to keep everybody connected, because living in such a rural area like Herefordshire, where most of our members are from, even though not all our members are from a farm, but from rural areas, you've got to keep everybody connected. And we've tried to do that through social media and different things like that. But no, going forward, obviously we don't know where we are or what's going to happen. But I think the main thing from perhaps Brexit or whatever, I don't want to go into too much depth because I don't have the knowledge, and Young Farmers is very much a non-political thing. But I think one thing that we try and do within Young Farmers is keep our members up to date and up to scratch with everything's going on within the political scene. We have different members which attend agri forums and representatives of the NFU. And what Young Farmers is, it's a membership organisation run by the members. So we try to keep our members informed that direction. And from that, then we try to keep our members informed even though Herefordshire is one county within the country, it is part of the national organisation, which then we can have our views heard on a national basis as well.
Thank you. You said in the interview that your farm is sheep only, so you've got all your eggs in one basket, but your specialism was really in having high health status for the sheep and trying to keep costs low and always looking at the business model.
No. So where I work, we just run sheep. So obviously you don't have perhaps the income throughout the year like having other enterprises on the farm, and we concentrate on having a high health status from our flock. So we're MB accredited, which is Mediavizna, so it's a respiratory problem that sheep can get, so we're accredited against that, and which is something which is quite desirable by a lot of sheep breeders. And so that's what we try to focus on, and it's quite nice that actually, given the circumstances, coronavirus, and obviously the future of farming within Brexit and stuff, that people are very optimistic about the future, and actually people are actually coming to us. What what enables a lot of flocks to do is we sell for recipients for embryo transfer. So people are actually invested in the sheep sector, which is quite nice to see. So people are very optimistic about the future, which I think is good.
That's good. Thank you very much. Well, do chip in if you have any comments to make from a young farmer's perspective on the questions I'm going to ask Bill and Phil now. I don't see Bill on screen. Has he disappeared?
I'm afraid we seem to have lost Bill. He's been coming and going, but at the moment he's not with us either on, well, anyway, that I can see.
Because my first question was about food standards, and I know the NFU has been lobbying hard on that, but should I leave this question until Bill is back, or would Phil like to say anything on that? Phil, should I leave that question to Bill?
I can say something on it. Obviously, probably not as much as Bill, but clearly, food standards is the key debate at the moment, which has energised quite a large number of people, largely because of the leaks not just leaks, but reports we've had concerning the initial stages of trying to agree a trade deal with the United States. The United States made it very, very clear that they see our food standards as being protectionist. Now, our own food standards at the moment are the same as the European ones, and the United States has failed to force Europe to take hormone-treated beef, to take chlorinated chicken, even though neither of these products actually pose a health risk to the people that are eating it. So, in essence, falling back under WTO rules, we risk if we ban these products, we risk a complaint by the Americans in terms of banning something which is safe. Of course, it's the methodology that we actually object to, and we feel that our methods are much better. They're tied in with much higher animal welfare standards, and we feel that within our own democracy, we don't want. I think it's very, very clear from the level of support, for instance, for the NFU petition, that the people of Britain do not want to have these products on the shelves. The problem is, of course, if those products get on the shelves, you very often find it's like the free range eggs question. If you ask how many people buy free range eggs, you find that like 2/3 or even 3/4 of the population only buy free range eggs, but 2/3 or 3/4 of the eggs that are bought are not free range eggs. And you can see that it's the thin end. It's a thin end of the wedge, because once these products are on the shelves, if they're cheaper, they will be bought. And one of the key points in terms of competitiveness of having higher standards is there was a report in the Financial Times, which is my own daily newspaper, so I think it's the only one that I read. But about 2 weeks ago, there was they've actually covered this whole issue very, very well, and there was a report that American production methods are roughly 30% cheaper than British or European production methods for pig meat, and that is entirely down to the legislative framework in which we have to work. Now, I'm not saying let us use American methods. I'm saying whatever the imports are, that should meet our standards. And unfortunately, we can't enforce this under the WTO. But within the wider European framework, we found that Europe was big enough to take on take on the complaints in the WTO, and if it meant paying a few tariffs on having tariffs levied on one or two other products, so be it. But we could stick to our guns. Isolated, I fear that the government will cave in, and that's I think the key issue on food standards, is that we want to protect our food standards, but we want to protect them not just, as I said at the protest last week, it's not just a question of food standards for the producer, for us. There's no point in having food standards for our producers that you can undercut by 20 or 30% in price simply by importing lower standards from elsewhere. So the standards have to be the standards, and the standards should be the standards that the consumer expects, not what the producer has to meet.
Thank you, Phil. Welcome back, Bill. You'll have gathered that we're on that first question on food standards. Can I say the agriculture bill went to committee stage in the House of Lords on Tuesday this week, I believe. What are the particular amendments that the NFU is pushing at the moment?
Well, the one real achievement of the last couple of weeks is we've got the basis of a Food Standards Commission.
Yeah.
And the government is actually listening to the signatures of 1 million people that are the voices that really care about the direction our country is going. It's more than just standards, actually, because if you sign up to the environmental situation that we all require in this country, the health of the nation, the health of the people that work here, the health of the food that we consume is all tied up in the same thing. Now, if we're about taking back control, which is what this whole thing was about, it'd be a bit foolish after we've taken back control to give control to somebody else.
Yes.
And we don't see anything from across the pond, for example, that's giving us a lot of confidence, because they suggest that you can probably inject disinfectant in your blood and that'll sort coronavirus out. So it's all about having a reasonable degree of food security in difficult times. And it's only actually in difficult times when you really appreciate the important things of life, like having food on the shelves. And most of our generation cannot remember a situation where there were shortages in our shops. So whether the House of Commons will take up the amendments to protect our producers against importation of products that don't meet our standards, which would be illegal to produce in this country. We're not looking for a safe place to farm, we're looking for a sensible place to farm. And if we export our production overseas, one, we can't keep an eye on it. And secondly, it's a long way to go abroad for food in a crisis.
Thank you. Shall we move on to the question of tariffs? Because Part 6 of the Agriculture Bill is about compliance with the WTO agreement on agriculture, but it doesn't say anything that I could see about tariffs. Tariffs are going to be very important both for imports and exports, because both will have an effect on the agriculture, on the farming industry. Peter Hardwick said to the House of Lords European Union Committee 3 years ago, if we look at our agricultural exports, they're currently very dependent on trade with the European Union, and on average about 80% of our agricultural exports go to the European Union. I know a lot of local farmers are very dependent on lamb sales to France. The government's introduced a new system of tariffs, including agricultural products. What do you think the impact will be on local farmers from those new tariffs? Who wants to go first on that, Phil or Bill?
Well, I'll chip in
Bill,
just briefly.
I know you were looking at tariffs today.
Briefly first, if you read the letter signed by Liz Truss and George Eustace a couple of weeks ago, they give the impression that tariffs will bring the lower cost products from overseas that are to our not produced to our standards up to the same price so that the consumer can actually choose on a level playing field. I don't actually think that's going to happen. I don't think they can get away with that on WTO rules. And at the end of the day, the consumer will probably choose the cheapest product.
Yeah.
So as much as George, Eustace and Liz Truss are placating some of us food producers, I don't think what they're suggesting will happen in reality.
Right.
Yeah, I think I largely agree with that, because I mean, they started off by, there was a report last year that even before the election, that they were looking at really slashing tariffs and almost zero tariffs in a lot of areas, and doing it unilaterally. But of course, what was actually published in May was nothing like that. Virtually almost everything was exactly the same, just a currency conversion of the current European tariff. And the reason for that is that they suddenly, one or two of them suddenly started reading the WTO rules, and they realized that they actually could not give the same thing away twice. So we have to start, so that's why the published tariffs are largely as they are, because basically if you give them away unilaterally beforehand, there's no way under WTO rules, you can't actually ratchet tariffs back up again then to give them away in a trade deal. So it's my view that they intend to give them away in the trade deals, but I agree with Bill that I don't think this twin track tariffing can work, and I think that they will struggle to actually say that products produced at a lower standard have a higher tariff. I think that I can't see. I don't think anybody in the world is doing this. I think it's extremely difficult to see how it would be practicable. So I think it will actually be dropped very soon. So I think the issue with tariffs is if we do face a big cut in tariffs for imports, of course it is going to make us uncompetitive, particularly if those standards are American standards or Brazilian standards. It's not just the actual standard of the product coming in, it's how it's produced. For instance, under WTO rules, there's very little we can do about importing Brazilian soya if on land that produced on land that was rainforest last week. You know, these are the it's the environmental standards as well that we have to produce to that our competitors don't. And I don't think that twin track tariffing can work in the WTO context. Of course, you are on WTO tariffs until you have a WTO ratified trade deal. And if we have a trade deal with the Americans, then we can vary the tariffs and we can vary them down. Well, we can vary them downwards. The same as if we actually get a deal with the European Union. Now, this is where the big issue of tariffs, in my view, is the tariffs on our exports, and particularly our sheep exports, going into the European Union. I don't think that it's feasible for us to find the same size of marketplace elsewhere in the world to divert our product. So I think it's extremely important that the government does continue to, I think, put more effort into getting a very, very strong trade deal with Europe so that we can continue to export tariff-free our sheep meat and cereals into Europe, because we have a 3 million in normal years. We have a 3 million exportable surplus of feed and biscuit wheat. So we need the European market for that as well. Otherwise, we're going further afield and we're competing head-to-head with Ukraine, with other grain-producing countries who are probably closer to the markets and are cheaper. So the tariffs, I think, are a bigger issue for our exporters than they are at the moment for our importers. And the difficulty with our imports is down to the government. It still hasn't produced any of these trade deals, but we need a reasonable tariff protection to continue when the trade deals are signed.
Thank you for that. Does Ernie want to say anything about sheep meat exports to the European Union, or is... Do you export much to the European Union?
To be fair, I don't really know much on the subject, to comment really. I think the prices are good at the moment, so I think it's nice that farmers are still producing top quality lamb for the market. Really, that's what I think is most important.
Okay, Bill, you had your hand up.
I'd just like to chip in there. Whatever happens with tariffs, and sheep meat is a very good example. We don't eat all of the sheep here.
No.
You know, we operate in a world market. There's parts of our carcass that are more desirable in other markets than in the UK. So it is imperative that we not only do a deal of some form, because we will, you know, there's no market for wool at the moment because China has stopped. Now, if we price our wool out of the Chinese market, the Australians will be in there, the New Zealanders. So in sheep meat and in every other productive area in Hereford agriculture, we've got to keep the production and the processing here. Paying tax and employing people here. The reason all these overseas migrants come to Herefordshire and the UK is because we treat them well and we pay them well. Now, if we export that productivity to other parts of the world, we have absolutely no control over it. And our treasury will be a lot worse off as a result.
Thank you. That's an important point. Well, I hear what Phil was saying about tariffs on exports perhaps being more important than tariffs on imports. But yesterday, Guy drew my attention to a policy exchange think tank report, which I've sent to both Phil and Bill, which was saying that whether it's a Trump administration again at the end of the year or a Biden administration, they're still going to be pressing very hard for agricultural liberalization in the UK, because it's very much a bipartisan interest in Washington. So what improving market access for US agriculture exports is a bipartisan interest, it says. So the report suggests either phasing in new import rules or only dropping tariffs on food produced to high welfare standards. So how would you react to that, or has Phil already covered that point perhaps?
I think we've pretty well covered that point, because I just don't think it's practicable to have multi-level tariffs based on different production methods. I think it's never been tried, and I don't know whether it would actually pass a challenge, and it may well not pass a challenge. So the problem we have is the government. Nobody in the government had. I mean, they were talking about trading on WTO rules when they hadn't read them.
Yes.
You know, I've had to go through these rules in years gone by for legislative purposes and for other purposes. And it was very, very clear that they didn't know what they were talking about. Now, it's clear now that most of the people who are directly involved, most of the ministers directly involved have now appraised themselves of these rules, and are suddenly finding the whole thing's a lot more difficult than they thought.
Right. We've touched on food labeling already, but it's obviously it's an important area. And how likely is it, do you think, that the supermarkets themselves will, well, sorry, Phil was saying that chlorinated chicken and hormone-fed beef are not in themselves unsafe, and the issues about the animal welfare standards really, but there are, I mean, Waitrose and the Co-op have both said that they're not going to stock foods like that. Do you think other supermarkets will take the same approach? Are consumers going to be able to see what's in the product, or are the Americans going to press us to reduce the amount of food labeling as they seem to have suggested?
Yeah, I'd just like to make one point. and it comes very clearly from across the pond. Trump says he puts America first.
Yes.
So our government is, in answer to a question on the chat, is, are they going to sign away agriculture for the financial services sector? I think they probably are.
Right.
Because there's more to be earned from it. But actually, we have as a nation to decide fundamentally who we are. If you can have Polish beef in a supermarket bag that looks like it's produced in Britain and is labelled up British, it just goes to show they'll do anything. It's about price.
Phil?
Yeah, the top end supermarkets will probably stick to their guns. I mean, Waitrose has got a very, very good reputation, and it stands by its reputation. It is not, it doesn't sell to people who are price sensitive. But what will happen is that they will crumble probably one by one, starting at lowest common denominator. And once that happens, I think that the top end will stick to it. But as time progresses, it will become normal for people to be eating this stuff, particularly the people who are most price sensitive. And I think that the line will not be held. As far as food labelling is concerned, really, it's something we should just simply say no to the American. We are keeping our food labelling. It's something we fought very, very hard for over the years. When in my time in the National Farmers Union committees, I mean, when I was on the committees was when we set up the Red Tractor, and you know, these are standards, and you know, it's not just, there's labelling standards, there's origin standards, and they've got stronger. I mean, as has been said, it was very difficult. We were seeing a lot of overseas produced meat repackaged, but I think largely that has been addressed. But we've been addressing it bit by bit. What we don't want to do now is go into reverse on labelling standards. And I think that there would be an outcry. Hopefully there would be an outcry, and that the government will not give in on this when it comes to doing trade deals.
Bill, did you have your hand up, or were you just adjusting your glasses?
Food gets eaten out of the home, and you don't very often see a label on it. And one thing that's come out of this crisis is, you know, when we lose that sector of the market, areas of our industry go into crisis. We've had milk go into crisis, we've had chips go into crisis, we've had cheese and all these other products. So however well we label things in the supermarket, and I agree that the top end people will always use British standards as their headline price, but whether you're in Tesco or Waitrose or Asda, there's similar products at all price levels, and the consumer on average will go for the cheaper stuff more often than not. But don't forget that a lot of food is eaten out of home, and it's very rarely labelled, and you don't know where the ingredients certainly aren't labelled.
No, that's right. I'll just say, for the benefit of the others, something I wrote to you and Bill a couple of days ago, Phil and Bill a couple of days ago, which was that when 38 Degrees launched their campaign to encourage supermarkets to not stock chlorinated chicken or hormone-fed beef, I put it up on Twitter, and immediately I got a response from the Co-op, which said that we're committed to our British farmers. We're committed to our British farmers and only stock 100% British meat, not just in the meat cabinet, but also in our sandwiches, our pies, and our ready meals. So you got support from the Co-op there, but that's maybe all you got. Can we move on, because time is going by, to farm income support? The basic payment scheme is going to be phased out, I believe, over the agricultural transition period, which is 7 years starting from next year. What's going to happen then? Does anyone know?
Well, this has been my sort of, I've been like a dog with a bone over this for ever since I saw it in the manifesto. because again, this is an area where I realised that it was Mr. Gove at the time, of course, that he hadn't read the WTO rules. Because to start with, they were going to get rid of the single farm payment and give us very, very big environmental payments to maintain our income. I immediately pointed out, I mean, I'm a party politician as well, and this was something that attracted us. You know, as a Lib Dem
Right.
politician, it was something, and I've been on several policy working groups, and I have drafted our CAP reform policy. So I had to go into the nitty gritty of actually what you could do under WTO rules and what you couldn't. And it's absolutely explicit that with environmental payments, whereas you can spend as much as you want in environmental payments, what you cannot do is pay the farmer more than it costs. So in other words, you can't use, under WTO rules, you can't use environmental payments to replace farm income support. The reason the CAP is as it is largely because it's one of the few ways you can actually legally, under WTO rules, support farmers' incomes. So to start with, we had this claim that we were going to get income supported with environmental payments. Once they'd actually read the rules, they still stuck to abolishing the basic payment scheme, but now we have these. We have the idea that there will be massive spending on the environment, but it will be at income foregone levels. It won't be giving us extra income. So the point that I made in the consultation was that if British farmers have no income support, and the European farmers do, the American farmers do, then we will be under such income pressure that we will either be getting out or getting big. And who then, if you're, instead of running, I'm arable, I've only got 250 acres, if I'm running 2,000 acres a man, or the arable farmers are running 2,000 acres a man, how many of them are then going to say, right, okay, to get this environmental support, which is at cost, I've got all this time to do all this free work for the government at cost only. Basically, I can't see in an income challenged industry how we'll be willing to go out and do environmental work for nothing. My view is actually that the fact that we have the basic payment scheme makes us willing to go out and do the environmental work, which currently now is at cost. I've been in environmental schemes now for 23 years. So I was in the high level scheme, now I'm in mid-tier. I've still got another 2 years to go. I haven't rolled over into Elms or signed up to. But so I have 23 years experience of actually delivering these schemes. And they don't actually provide me any income. It's the basic payment scheme underpins my farm income. But without that, my farm income reduces to not much above zero unless I can take on extra land. And I'm really not very interested in doing environmental work for nothing when I've probably got to go off farm to try and bolster my income. And they haven't thought this through, and they won't backtrack. They dug themselves into a hole when they didn't know the WTO rules, and that rather than fessing up and saying, well, actually we actually need to do something a little bit more sensible, they're sticking at it, but now on an income foregone only basis. So I am not at all impressed with the way this has panned out, and I did actually predict it at the 2015 election when they started pushing this idea. It was a 2017 election, sorry.
Thank you, Phil. Can I ask Bill, is that something that the NFU might take up with the government, or has it done so already?
I think these discussions are being had all of the time, and especially the consultation around Elms at the moment. I agree with
Can you spell out ELMS for us? It's ELMS, isn't it?
ELMS. It's the Environmental Land Management Scheme, which is basically the conservation successor to HLS and mid-tier. income foregone is not really enough. Two things: we've got to accept that we actually do public goods we do get public money for public goods already, because we have to register everything we do. Every piece of land is mapped and monitored in order to welfare the soil, the land, and the air, and keep everything healthy. So we're already doing that. But if they think they're going to change over to elms rather than the farm payment, it's only a matter of time before the marginal areas of this country, and there's plenty of Herefordshire that's pretty marginal, will just disappear into scrub, as has happened in New Zealand, and you'll have massive, very low input outfits. Now that may be what the government wants, but they mustn't forget that if you want to keep this green and pleasant land, you've got to keep paying somebody to do it.
Yes.
And profitability underpins everything.
I have a little bit of direct experience because I have about sort of 28 acres or so of permanent pasture land here, which is let for grazing. So since my father's day, we've been getting a small amount of basic payment scheme, but it's a big problem. Anything else that you want to say on income support, or have we covered that topic? We've touched a bit on farming and environmental policies already. Is there anything else there? Because the agriculture bill deals with issues such as fertilizers, tracing animals, nothing to do with COVID, I assume, and the red meat levy. But how will that aspect of the agriculture bill affect farmers, in your view?
I'll tell you something that'll frighten farmers more than anything is if the Chancellor messages IHT. Because that's holding a lot of land up at the moment with people that are trying to protect their assets to hand on to the next generation.
Right.
If he changes the rules on that, you'll see return on capital drop lower than it is now, and it's not very high, and you'll see land values drop considerably, which probably wouldn't be a bad thing.
Phil, you're muted.
Yeah. I think they do expect land values to fall, and I think they will, but not nearly to the extent that they would need to, largely because even though to buy a significant amount of agricultural land is, to a farmer, a huge amount of money. When you tell a householder, the urban rich, or the urban rich newly moved into the villages, that they can actually have a 20-acre field for what they paid for the house, they can't believe it. It's so cheap. So in our fairly heavily populated environment, the price of farmland won't come down to the point that it needs to for broadacre commercial farming to take place, buying and selling land at its real agricultural economic value. It is not, I mean, the economists who advise the government don't necessarily always take into account that the amenity value for non-farmers to buy it, they just, even the snob value, will keep land prices at probably 4 or 5 times what they need to be for proper commercial farming in terms of buying and selling land simply as a productive asset. And okay, it might well fall, but it won't fall nearly enough to take us out of the tax brackets. And also we've got threats of wealth taxes, we've got threats of all sorts of things. COVID has made all sorts of things come into the frame. If we end up being hit by wealth taxes, then we could see that our tax bills will exceed our income virtually every year. And this is another battle we'll might have to face in years to come.
I can see a question in the chat column from Guy to the two of you. How do you see the competition between high intensity farming and lower intensity sustainable farming, particularly here in Herefordshire? Who'd
personally
like to go
don't.
first?
I don't recognise the question, sadly. There is just as a good a degree of sustainability in high intensity agriculture as low intensity agriculture. Low intensity agriculture is just that. It's unproductive usually. So, you often find the welfare in big outfits, professionally run, a lot higher than smaller outfits, and often they spend more money on the environmental and the aesthetic goals that we all have. So we want professional farmers who are doing a good job, that are producing food that's good for our nation to live off. I'm not phased whether it comes from big farmers or small farmers. I just want it to come from good farmers.
Guy, do you want to clarify your question?
Yes, perhaps I didn't express it very clearly in the chat, Bill.
Yeah.
It was more. We have a colleague up towards Briley, who buys in, I think, chicks. Maybe he has about 10,000 of them. And on the other hand, over towards Lions Hall, and elsewhere, we have farms producing chickens to the level of maybe hundreds of thousands, maybe even 1 million.
Yeah.
So it was not so much quality, because I understand that. It was more to do with whether smaller scale sustainable outfits like the friend up in Briley are really going to be able to stay in business against the low cost, high capital intensive production systems. That was really what it was about.
Well, yeah, I get that, but my point is this: Herefordshire needs that big chicken industry, not only from farming purposes, but we need that production here in Hereford, employing people, paying tax, shopping in our shops, living in our houses, so that we can send that chicken out to the rest of the nation. And that isn't going to happen with the small scale producers. The reason we've got excellent chicken on the shelves at £3 a chicken is the direct result of your colleagues around Lions Hall, and I take my hat off to them. I salute everything they do. And if they have to put windows in those big chicken houses just to placate the technical staff that come round and to tell their customers in those stores that they've made environmental improvements, they'll do it. Or the chicken doesn't look out of the window, but the person buying the chicken thinks it's better because they got a window in the shed. And yeah, I salute those guys around Lions Hall. Look, it's fantastic what they've done. And we've got to sort this phosphates thing out so they can build more chicken houses.
Yeah,
and
can
so
I come in
go
on
out
this?
to Poland.
Where am I on? Yeah.
Phil.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the small versus the large producer, I mean, the small producers, if they are going to survive, have got to be producing at a premium. And with chickens, we have. I never buy supermarket chicken. I kill my own. They're completely free range. They're full Hugh Fernley Whitting stall, 6 months old, fully combed up. Do it myself. My wife draws them. I kill and pluck them, and we never buy. We've got geese as well. But arable unit, we are professional farmers. We are trying to produce 10, 11 tons a hectare. Of wheat. That's what we're trying to do. Now, the broader issue, there is sometimes a misconception that low input agriculture is actually better for the climate, but it ignores indirect land use change issues. Now, I've been involved. Well, I've been on HDCA committees too, and in fact, I was on the R&D, which is the AHDB as it is now, the Agriculture Horticulture Development Board. I spent 15 years on the Research and Development Committee for the HDCA, which runs the research for oilseeds and cereals. And I ended up chairing a DEFRA Link project on carbon footprinting agricultural outputs. And it was linked in with some actual research on nitrous oxide emissions. So I have actually some first-hand knowledge of this, and we had to do indirect land use change and look at it. And what you actually see is that when you actually look at things like fertilizer use as against the emissions per ton, you get a U-shaped curve, and you find out that the actual, the most sustainable in terms of climate is just a little bit below the levels of fertilizers we're putting on at the moment. Because basically, if you go lower than that, you are producing less wheat, less barley, less everything for the same amount of effort, the same amount of land. And if the demand is there, in the world for your product, it simply is an incentive for the Brazilians yet again to cut some more trees down. And the extra climate change you get, the extra emissions you get from using more land for farming, actually outweighs everything, all the fertilizer you put in and everything else. So this is sustainable intensification, which is a term that was brought up by scientists probably about 10 or 12 years ago. And it's something that I definitely subscribe to. I don't say that organic farmers should pack up and go home, because they actually provide quite a varied form, a variation in innovation. And you need innovators in different areas. And of course, a lot of people, they produce a premium product. I buy some things that are organic myself. I buy organic yogurt, but I think in the dairy, if you're producing dairy on clover leaves, then you're not very far off in productivity terms. The guy who's using Italian ryegrass and higher levels of nitrogen. So I think it's horses for courses in terms of, but looking at your emissions and emissions per unit of output, not per hectare. It's very, very easy to have the lowest emissions per hectare. It's stop farming altogether and let it grow wild. And you will get lower emissions per hectare, but the emissions per ton will be absolutely astronomical, because they'll be infinite. And it's emissions per ton that is important, not emissions per hectare. And we have to keep that and keep that in mind, and keep a scientific outlook on this. So I think there's room for the big and there's room for the small, but only if the small are either diversifying like me or producing a premium product at a higher price to a market that can afford to pay for it.
Thank you very much, Phil. I'm conscious of the time going by, but we did start a little bit late. So can I ask whether anyone else in the room has any burning question they would like to ask that hasn't been already asked? Put your hand up if you do. Richard Henson. You need to unmute.
Okay, yeah, while the experts are here, I'd just like to ask a bit about the amendments that are currently sort of being debated in the agriculture bill. I'm afraid it doesn't mean that much to me, as I'm not sort of from a farming background, but I'm willing to learn if anybody could try and enlighten me a little about what those amendments are and what impact they might have. But that's all, really.
We've touched on that a little bit, but Bill, can you say anything more?
As a professional farmer, I think I can say I don't understand them either. There's almost some sort of disconnect between this new bill and what's happening out on the out in the farms of this country. Somebody touched on the urban elite. You know, they love the countryside for leisure. They love the countryside to live in, to ride their bikes, to run, to do all these sort of things. But actually, we're missing the point of why a large tracts of it are there. You know, we have to produce a safe environment to farm in, and we're only just emerging from this crisis, and people have already forgotten that the shelves were empty 2 months ago. So the NFU are trying to get through this Food Standards Commission. I'm a bit skeptical about that, because we've had a retail ombudsman now for 12 years. Christine, take on, and it hasn't actually probably delivered what it set out to deliver, because actually proving that malpractice is going on is a lot harder than talking about it. The Lords have looked at the chlorinated chicken, the standards, the environmental things that we all have to adhere to. Whether it'll get past the Commons with this majority, I do not know. But it's a myriad of confusion to me as a commercial farmer, so I don't know how anybody else can understand it either.
Phil, anything to add?
Yeah, I think it's unlikely to get very much more through the Commons. I mean, they have the Commissioner. It is a significant win for the NFU, particularly on animal welfare standards. I think it also includes food safety, but we already have what we need in terms of legislation and also in terms of WTO rules to keep out unsafe food. So I think that including food safety was in a sense giving us something we've already got, because food safety in sheer technical terms, that is well covered. We can keep out unsafe food, full stop, and nobody will take us to court over it. So that's already covered. So the only thing that it really gives us is basically an advisory commission on animal welfare. In terms of environment, basically, if we get a load of imports coming in from Brazil, where we know what's going on with the deforestation there, it's doubled it since Bolsonaro came to power. And if we see that they're just cutting rainforest down and sending the stuff over, and we put in the commissioner will simply say, not my business, not part of my remit. You know, these are really important issues. Now, some people are complaining that the commission is only advisory. Now, technically, that actually has to be. You cannot really have a commissioner who can overrule Parliament. It's an extremely difficult issue with democracy. I mean, there are some scientific things which have been put out to agencies, but generally the Parliament still has an overriding view. So I don't take that as a criticism of it, but I do agree that it's not got much in the way of teeth, and its remit is very, very, very narrow. And I would like to see its remit broadened. It will only be advisory, but it depends then as whether the government is minded to take its advice or not. And its advice should be out there, public, so that everybody can see what it's advising. And if everybody can see what it's advising, then you can at least put pressure on government to follow its advice. So it's a win, but it needs to be broader and it needs to be stronger.
Thank you, Phil. Does anyone have any other questions? Nope. Well, then I think I'm going to say a very, very big thank you to Phil Benyon and Bill Kwan and Ernie Richards for joining us this evening and giving us so much to reflect on. And, you know, the times are still murky. There's still so much that's unknown, but it's been good to hear what your concerns are. Thank you very much indeed. Bill.
Just one thing I'd like to bring to the group that, and I'm not here to fly the NFU flag in particular, but our leader at the moment has an alliance of all the rural and animal welfare charities in this nation behind her.
Right.
And that has never, ever happened. We've never had farming, so much farming support, from chefs to environmental to animal rights, and they're all in one collegiate alliance to try and move this bill, and they have actually moved it just slightly, which is a step in the right direction. I have to take my hat off to Minette Batters for what she's done. You know, she's not very big, but she's like Elizabeth I. She's got a feeble frame of a woman with the heart of a lion inside, I think was the phrase. 400 years ago, but there you go.
Can I just say that she is actually doing a great job. I've been really impressed with her ever since she's taken over. So I do agree. I think the NFU is doing a good job too. I mean, I was a vice chair of the oil seeds committee at one point, 20 odd years ago. So I'm a bit too much of a vested interest in the NFU. So you can probably take my praise with a pinch of salt. But I think the NFU's really played a blinder on this one. And bringing Jamie Oliver and others into the.
I was going to say, was it Minette who got Jamie to write the letter? Well done her. Well done her. Thank you all very much indeed. Can I just say briefly that our next information webinar, we're planning to do something on environmental issues with someone that Jill Hanna is going to get from the relevant DG in the Commission, and I hope with Molly Scott-Cato, who is talking now to Stratford on Europe about new European Green Deals. Maybe we'll get her to come and say something about that in September. We're looking at the second half of September as the best, likely best timing for the Commission. And then after that, we'll probably do something on settled status in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you very much indeed for tonight.
Thank you, Rick.
Very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.